Warning: this episode contains extreme violence and sexual assault involving children. If this isn't for you, please turn it off and come back next week. I'll have a lighter episode planned for you. If you wish to continue, listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Northern Nightmares, your home for nightmarish stories throughout Canada and beyond. I'm your host, Andrew, and today I'll be talking about one of British Columbia's more horrifying serial killers, a monster of a person that was corrupt even in his early days, ended up getting caught and sent to life in prison for the murder of 11 victims, ranging between the ages of 9 and 18 years old. This is the Beast of British Columbia, Clifford Olson. This story takes place roughly a decade before the Ken and Barbie killers, Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, and at least 2 decades before the famous pig farmer murderer, Robert Pickton. Both I'll be covering in the future, as this monster is becoming quite forgotten in time, as he should. The victims and their families affected must always be remembered. Before I start, I want to address that I won't be discussing some of the grisly details that involve sexual assault, as these victims were all children. I want to do this story in a respectful way for my listeners and the families affected by this. Clifford Robert Olson Jr. was born January 1st, 1940, in Vancouver. His parents, Leona and Clifford Sr., were described as just regular people with ordinary jobs. Leona worked at a local fish cannery, and Clifford Sr. was a milkman, who also, at one time, served the Canadian military. The family lived in a suburban home in Richmond. Now, it's not clear what might have triggered Clifford's homicidal behavior, as there's no record of traumatic childhood. I personally think he was born evil and with a hunger for trouble. At a young age, he was known as a loner. Any kids that tried to interact with him ended up getting bullied. However, he enjoyed being alone, as he was developing his crime life at an early age, usually by stealing milk money off porches, selling out-of-date lottery tickets I assume he acquired from his parents, and also stealing various berries from the neighbors' gardens, only to end up reselling them. His teachers considered him quite manipulative and charming when it suited his needs. By age 10, he was skipping classes. By junior high, he was placed in various slow learner classes, only to end up failing them many times. He eventually dropped out of school by age 16 and got his first job at a local racetrack. It wasn't long, though, before he would land himself in jail. At 17, he received 9 months for burglary in 1957, eventually developing a pattern of escaping and being recaptured, which would occur over 7 times in the next decade. By the time Olson was an adult, he had already spent a few years of freedom outside of prison. Most of his life so far was spent behind bars for 83 convictions in his 40 years, including property-related fraud, thefts, and sexual-related instances in prisons involving inmates and staff. He was released from jail for the final time, though, on September 7th, 1980, where before his release, he developed a lust for murder, especially with children. This would be 2 months before his first victim. I'm going to be going down the list of all 11 victims with dates and the methods he used to take their lives. All victims were sexually assaulted, and this will be the only time I mention this. November 17th, 1980, Christina Weller, 12 years old, was from Surrey, BC, and she was last seen leaving a local mall on a friend's bike she had borrowed. A car had pulled up next to her, and a man asked her if she knew where the unemployment office was for hiring kids. This was Clifford. She left the bike next to the Surrey Animal Hospital and hopped in the passenger seat to show him the way. Her parents reported her missing a week later, and police classified her disappearance as a runaway. On December 25th, 1980, Christmas Day, her body was found by a man named Bill Andrew walking his dog along the Fraser River dikes in Richmond. She was strangled with a belt and stabbed repeatedly in the chest and abdomen. Police suspected Olson early on, but claimed to have lacked the resources to keep him under constant surveillance. During her funeral at the Burquin mortuary, the priest that gave her sermon said, I quote, "God's wrath was waiting for her killer." April 16th, 1981, Colleen Marion Dagnoff, age 13, was staying at her grandmother's in Surrey at the time. She was visiting a friend's place in Delta, at least 2 or so bus stops away, and before leaving to head home, she contacted her grandmother to say she would be home before supper. She was reported missing 3 days later, after having a run-in with Clifford, asking the same question to her about the location of an unemployment office. April 22nd, Darren Todd Johnsrud was 16, was out enjoying the day when Clifford rolled up and offered him a job for $10 an hour. After chatting for a bit, Darren jumped in the car and was reported missing 2 weeks later and found on May 2nd. May 19th, Sandra Wolfensteiner, 16 years old, living with her sister at the time, was out on the town to visit her boyfriend at his job. But before getting to his work, she stopped off to visit his mother. After her visit, she was seen by the mother hitchhiking and getting into a car with a man. This was obviously Clifford. She was never heard from again. June 21st, 1981, Ada Anita Court, 13 years old, left working for the evening at a babysitting gig. She was heading to the buses to head back to Burnaby. She was discovered later that night, found by a man named Jim that noticed a man bent over a woman. This was Clifford, and had started to chase Jim in his vehicle, but Jim had managed to lose him. Days later, Jim noticed on the TV a missing persons report for Ada. All victims after Christina were found bludgeoned to death to the head with a hammer. 6 more victims would be adopted in a very quick succession, starting in July 1981. July 2nd, 9-year-old Simon Partington lived in Surrey. He headed out to his friend's place on his bike, but never made it. He was reported hours later, and it being hard to be a runaway case, foul play was considered. After a week, Simon had vanished because of Olson. July 9th, 1981, Olson picked up a guy named Randy Ludlow. They both went to pick up his friend, 14-year-old Judy Cosma, who worked at a McDonald's at the time. They were giving her a lift to an interview at a Wendy's in Richmond. The 3 of them were drinking and smoking in the car, eventually stopping at a liquor store, and Randy got out to get more drinks for the 3 of them. Clifford offered Judy a job offer, but she didn't accept right away. She was getting worried now that she would be late for her interview, and having a buzz on, Clifford offered her some drugs to take the edge off. Clifford dropped Randy off at his apartment and told him he would take Judy to her interview. However, she was blacking out due to the drugs she had taken. She was never heard from again, and her body was found near Weaver Lake. On July 23rd, 15-year-old Raymond King II decided to take the day to head to Canada's Manpower Youth Employment Center, hoping to start making some money of his own. Clifford having spotted the boy, promised him what he wanted, and Raymond hopped in the car, never to be seen again. They ended up on a dirt road near a place called Alpine Lake, where Clifford had drove a spike into the boy's head and dumped the body over a cliff, pushing some boulders onto his body, making sure they landed on his head as well. He was reported hours later by his father, Raymond Sr., to be missing. I apologize if that detail was too graphic. There was much more details I myself discovered that I wish I never read, but you can see this monster had no remorse. July 25th, Clifford was on the hunt again, and he found 18-year-old Sigrun Arn, a German visitor to BC, 2 days later. She had planned to visit some family in Coquitlam, while the tour group she was with did their own thing. On her way back to the hostel she stayed at, for which her group was also attending, they were located in Burnaby. Olson noticed her waiting for public transit. Convinced the teen to hop in, he promised her a tour on the way to her hostel. They were having a few drinks as well, and one of the beers had 3 chlorohol hydrate pills, also known as sleeping pills. Her body was found at a swampy area near some train tracks. 15-year-old Terry Lynn Carson on July 27th was heading out for the day to apply for some jobs, eventually running into Clifford with a job offer. She hopped into his car and having a sleeping pill lace pill with him. He drove out to the city of Hope to a place called Agassiz, dumped her body after killing her with a screwdriver in the skull and finishing her off by drowning in a river. And the last victim, age 17, Louise Cartran, on July 30th. She was heading out to her shift at a local diner, stopping at a gas station to pick up some smokes. Clifford noticed this and stopped to offer his job pitch. He offered her a laced beer, drove her out to the woods, killed her with a hammer, and then burying her body with rocks. I had never said some details on how some of the victims were murdered because it wasn't until later found that they were either strangled or bludgeoned to death. On August 12th, Olson was arrested on suspicion for an attempt to abduct 2 girls. On August 25th, Olson was charged with the murder of Judy Kozma, as her body was recently found and evidence proved Olson was the killer. The whereabouts of the other bodies weren't discovered in a traditional way, as Olson managed to secure himself a deal with the RCMP. For each body, Olson wanted $10,000 placed in a trust fund for his wife and infant child. Now I know this is shocking that this guy had a wife, and while I didn't mention it earlier, it's because I couldn't find any details on them. As the deal was controversial, I would think that they were placed in some kind of protection from the media and families of the victims. His family received $100,000 for all the bodies. The 11th one was considered a freebie by Olson. On January 1982, Olson was facing 11 counts of first-degree murder, which at the time he pleaded not guilty. But on January 11th, he changed his stance to guilty when he acquired the financial deal for his family. He was sentenced to 11 concurrent life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years, and sent to the Supermax prison for special handling extreme criminals. This was in St. Anne des Plaines, Quebec. The judge of the trial said, I quote, My considered opinion is that you should never be granted parole for the remainder of your days. It would be foolhardy to let you at large. This case changed Canada. It reshaped how RCMP coordinated missing persons cases. The controversial deal made sparked outrage about the serial offender's rights and any others that may arise. Predators can look normal, blend into crowds, they can smile, charm, and even lie to achieve their lust. The west coast of Canada would never see the world the same again. In 1997, Olson was denied parole, which was allowed as he fell under the law, the Faint Hope program, having served 15 years. He would, though, rot in prison for another 10 more years. In July 18, 2007, he was denied again, which at this time was 25 years served. At this time, Olson made bizarre claims stating that he held info about the attacks on 9/11 and Canada had no jurisdiction on him as he had an agreement with the US. This obviously was bullshit, and Olson was just trying to sway the courts in his favor. But he failed miserably. But was allowed to make a case for parole every 2 years. I feel like this was the court's way of just making him suffer even more, as in November 2010, he was denied yet again. Controversy arose when media leaked info that Olson was receiving 2 federal benefits totaling to $1,169.47 a year. This was Guaranteed Income Supplement, or GIS, and Old Age Security. With 46,000 petition signatures to terminate these benefits, Prime Minister of the time, Stephen Harper, and his team looked into this, and later deciding to indeed terminate his benefits. On September 2011, Olson was moved to a hospital in Laval, Quebec, and later died due to cancer. That is the tragic story of one of BC's dark moments in history. Follow me on Instagram and wherever you listen to this show. Also, if you enjoy this and like to help me promote my podcast, feel free to share it. Tell your friends and family. You can contact me at northernnightmares@outlook.ca if you want to send me a story you would like me to cover. Next week, I promise I'll have a lighter but creepy story, as we're heading to the 1960s for one of the first famous alien abduction stories in the US. See you soon, sweet dreams, and remember, nightmares are closer than you think.